Imagine a world where a simple object could determine who ruled and who obeyed, where symbols weren't mere decorations, but weapons of control and submission. Picture ancient societies where the line between power and powerlessness was drawn not by written laws or modern communication, but by visual emblems that commanded immediate respect and fear. Throughout human history, from the earliest tribal settlements to the grandest empires, one question has remained constant. How do you make others recognize your authority? How do you ensure that your will is followed, your decisions respected, your status acknowledged? The answer lies in the fascinating world of power symbolism. Since the dawn of civilization, power needed to be displayed, reinforced, and transmitted. But how could this be accomplished in an era without writing, without codified laws, without modern means of communication? Kings, priests, and chieftains discovered that objects, colors, and gestures could represent their authority and secure the loyalty of their followers. A particular staff held in the right hand, a specific color worn that no one else could display, a throne elevated above all others. These weren't random choices, but calculated displays that spoke a universal language, the language of power. Today, we're diving into this captivating journey to uncover how the first symbols of power emerged and how they shaped human history. From the mammoth tusks carried by prehistoric clan leaders to the ornate crowns of divine kings, from the sacred spaces where only the chosen few could enter to the grand monuments that proclaimed a ruler's might to the heavens, each symbol tells a story of ambition, control, and the human desire for order. These ancient symbols resonate with us even now, echoing through our modern institutions, political ceremonies, and cultural practices. The raised dais where a judge sits, the distinctive uniform of military leaders, the seal stamped on official documents, all descend from traditions thousands of years old, speaking to something primal in our understanding of hierarchy and authority. So join me as we explore this hidden language that has shaped human societies since our earliest gatherings. If you love history and want to unravel the mysteries of the great empires, like this video, subscribe to the Dawn of Humankind channel and don't miss a single episode of our journey through the remarkable story of humanity. It all began in the earliest tribal societies, long before written history, when our ancestors first discovered that leadership required visual distinction. Tribal leaders adorned themselves with carefully selected bones, feathers, and stones, not merely as decoration, but as profound symbols of status and authority that separated them from ordinary members of the tribe. Imagine a prehistoric gathering where everyone immediately knows who leads simply by looking. No introductions needed, no titles announced. The message was clear through visual language alone. These first power symbols weren't random choices, but deliberate marks of distinction that communicated rank and commanded respect without requiring a single word. In Africa, tribal chiefs wore necklaces made from the teeth of dangerous animals, lions, leopards, or crocodiles. Each tooth told a story of a successful hunt, demonstrating the chief's courage, strength, and hunting prowess. When a chief walked among his people wearing a necklace of 20 lion teeth, everyone understood the unspoken message: I am powerful enough to confront and defeat the king of beasts. Such visible proof of bravery established natural authority and earned deep respect from the community. Similarly, Native American chiefs wore elaborate headdresses with eagle feathers, each feather representing a brave deed or act of leadership. The more feathers, the more accomplished the chief. The tallest headdresses literally made leaders stand above others, creating a physical manifestation of their elevated status. The materials themselves, rare eagle feathers that were difficult and dangerous to obtain, reinforced the message that the wearer was extraordinary. In Polynesian societies, chiefs carried intricately carved staffs made from sacred woods. The patterns weren't merely decorative, but told stories of the chief's lineage, connecting him to revered ancestors and the gods themselves. When held during important ceremonies, these staffs transformed a mere person into a vessel of divine authority. Here's something fascinating. These early power symbols followed surprisingly similar patterns across completely isolated cultures. From the Arctic to the Amazon, leaders instinctively gravitated toward items that were rare, difficult to obtain, dangerous to acquire, or required exceptional skill to create. This remarkable convergence suggests something fundamental about how humans recognize and respect authority. Did you know that in ancient Persia, the king's throne was called the peacock throne? This magnificent seat was adorned with gold, precious gemstones, and of course ornate peacock motifs, birds that symbolized immortality and majesty in Persian culture. The throne was considered so essential to royal legitimacy that when a king died, his successor had to be crowned upon this very seat to validate his rule. According to historical accounts, the original peacock throne contained over 1,000 pounds of gold and was studded with diamonds, rubies, emeralds, and pearls, including the famous Koh-i-Noor diamond. When foreign ambassadors were brought before the Persian king, they were deliberately positioned so the throne would catch the sunlight, creating a dazzling display that literally blinded visitors, a perfect metaphor for the overwhelming power of the monarch. These early symbols of power weren't just about vanity or aesthetics. They served crucial social functions, creating visual shorthand for leadership in societies without written records. They established order, prevented constant power struggles, and allowed communities to organize efficiently. In many ways, these symbols were humanity's first language of governance, a visual vocabulary that communicated authority, legitimacy, and social structure long before the first hieroglyph or cuneiform character was ever pressed into clay. As humanity's first great civilizations emerged along the fertile river valleys of the Nile and the Tigris-Euphrates around 5,000 years before Christ, power symbolism evolved dramatically. No longer were simple adornments enough. These complex societies with their hierarchies, priesthoods and palaces demanded more sophisticated emblems of authority. Egypt and Mesopotamia, the cradles of civilization, transformed the concept of leadership into something divine, something sacred. The tribal chief became the god king, and with this elevation came extraordinary new symbols that didn't just distinguish leaders, they transformed them into living deities. In Egypt, the pharaoh's most recognizable symbol was the shent, the famous double crown. Picture this magnificent headdress, the white crown of Upper Egypt rising tall like a bowling pin, nested within the red crown of Lower Egypt with its distinctive curl at the front. When a pharaoh wore this combined crown after the unification of Egypt around 3,000 years before Christ, it wasn't just headwear, it was a political statement broadcast to everyone who saw it. I rule all of Egypt, from the Mediterranean to the first cataract of the Nile, a united kingdom under one divine ruler. The symbolism was so powerful that even when Egypt occasionally split into competing kingdoms, pretenders and legitimate rulers alike sought to claim the double crown, understanding that whoever wore it claimed the mandate of the gods themselves. But perhaps no symbol spoke more clearly of divine authority than the pharaoh's crook and flail, the shepherd's staff, and the grain thresher held crossed over the chest. These weren't random objects, but carefully chosen symbols that told a story. The crook represented the pharaoh as the shepherd of his people, guiding and protecting them, while the flail symbolized his power to punish wrongdoers and maintain order. Together, they embodied the perfect balance of care and discipline that divine kingship promised. In Mesopotamia, kings carried elaborately decorated mace heads and staffs during ceremonial processions. Archaeological finds from ancient Ur reveal golden scepters with lapis lazuli inlays that would have gleamed magnificently in the sunlight. When King Ur-Nammu raised his golden scepter before the people in the 21st century before Christ, everyone understood that his authority came directly from the great god Enlil. Here's something fascinating about these royal symbols. They weren't just created for their visual impact, they were embedded in cosmic mythology. The Egyptian pharaoh's crook and flail were the same implements held by Osiris, god of the afterlife. By holding these objects, the pharaoh wasn't just claiming to be like a god, he was literally embodying the divine presence on earth. An incredible detail from ancient texts tells us that in Mesopotamia, before a king could legitimately rule, he had to participate in a sacred ceremony called taking the hand of Marduk. This ritual involved the king physically grasping the hand of the statue of the chief god, Marduk, symbolizing divine approval of his reign. Without this ceremony, a king might have power, but he would lack legitimacy in the eyes of his subjects. Perhaps most striking was how these royal symbols created an unbroken chain between heaven and earth. When an Egyptian pharaoh held his ankh, the symbol of life, he wasn't just displaying wealth or status, he was channeling the very power of the gods to preserve life in Egypt. During the annual Nile flooding, crucial for agriculture, the pharaoh would perform rituals with these divine implements, convincing his people that he personally ensured the river would rise to nourish their crops. These symbols did something tribal emblems never could. They justified absolute power. If the king wore the crown of the gods, held the scepter of the cosmos, and performed the rituals that kept the world in balance, how could mere mortals question his decisions? The brilliance of these divine symbols was that they made obedience not just a matter of fear or respect, but a religious duty. To disobey the king was to disobey the gods themselves. What's truly remarkable is that many of these ancient symbols continue to resonate today. When Queen Elizabeth II of England was crowned in 1953, she received an orb and scepter in a ceremony with roots stretching back to these ancient traditions. The divine symbolism had changed from polytheistic to Christian, but the underlying message remained remarkably similar. Power flows from above, and these sacred objects are its earthly channels. But power wasn't confined to objects you could hold in your hand or wear on your head. The most impressive symbols of authority were literally built into the landscape itself. Temples and palaces weren't merely places to live or worship. They were monumental statements of dominance, designed to inspire awe, project strength, and communicate the eternal nature of the ruler's authority. Imagine yourself as a simple farmer in ancient Egypt, living in a modest mud brick home along the Nile. One day you travel to Giza, and suddenly rising from the desert like mountains made by human hands, stand the Great Pyramids. The Great Pyramid of Khufu, towering nearly 500 feet into the sky, built with over 2 million stone blocks, each weighing more than 2 tons. How could you not feel utterly small and powerless before such a display? And that was precisely the point. The pyramids weren't simply elaborate tombs, they were political propaganda carved in stone. They shouted a message that every Egyptian would understand. Your pharaoh commands such power that he can move mountains, reshape the earth itself, and create monuments that will outlast eternity. When construction finished on the Great Pyramid, around 2,500 years before Christ, it remained the tallest human-made structure on Earth for nearly 4,000 years, a record of architectural dominance that wasn't broken until the completion of Lincoln Cathedral in England in the 14th century. What's particularly fascinating about these structures is how they manipulated human psychology. When approaching an Egyptian temple, visitors walked through a series of spaces that grew progressively smaller, darker, and more restricted. The common people could enter the outer courtyard. The nobles might proceed further into the hypostyle hall with its forest of massive columns, but only the highest priests and the pharaoh himself could enter the Holy of Holies, the sacred inner sanctuary where the god was believed to dwell. This architectural progression wasn't random. It physically embodied the social hierarchy, reminding everyone of their place in the cosmic order. In Mesopotamia, the ziggurats served similar purposes, but with different symbolism. These massive stepped pyramids, like the famous ziggurat of Ur, built around 4,000 years before Christ, were designed as artificial mountains, staircases connecting heaven and earth. The king alone could ascend to the shrine at the summit, physically demonstrating his unique role as intermediary between gods and mortals. Imagine the spectacle during sacred festivals as the king climbed those monumental stairs, his figure growing smaller as he ascended toward the heavens, until he disappeared into the temple at the top to commune with the gods on behalf of his people. Even the design of royal thrones communicated power through architecture in miniature. The Assyrian king's throne was elevated, so visitors had to look up at him, literally elevating him above common humanity. The famous throne of King Minos, discovered at Knossos in Crete, was built into an architectural niche, framing the king as if he were a living statue or deity. Here's a remarkable detail many don't realize. Ancient architects understood principles of forced perspective and psychological manipulation. The approach to Egypt's Temple of Luxor is lined with sphinxes that gradually decrease in size, making the temple appear even larger and more distant than it actually is as you walk toward it. These weren't aesthetic choices, they were calculated effects designed to make power tangible, to give physical form to authority. Perhaps most extraordinary is how these architectural symbols enabled a handful of elites to control populations of hundreds of thousands. Without modern technologies of surveillance or mass communication, how did ancient rulers maintain control? Partly through these overwhelming displays of architectural power that reminded everyone, every day, of the ruler's might. When you live in the shadow of a pyramid or ziggurat that required the labor of tens of thousands of workers over decades, you don't easily forget who commands such resources. And did you know about the ingenious acoustic engineering in many ancient temples? At the Temple of Kukulkan in Chichen Itza, built by the Maya around 1,000 years after Christ, the design creates an echo that sounds remarkably like the call of the sacred Quetzal bird when you clap your hands at the base of the stairs. For people who believed their rulers communicated with divine forces, such magical effects would have been profoundly convincing evidence of their connection to supernatural power. So did you know that the throne of the Persian king was called the Peacock Throne? If you're enjoying this video, please like it, share it, and subscribe to the Dawn of Humankind channel for more incredible stories about ancient civilizations. And tell us in the comments, which symbol of power do you find most fascinating? Colors were far from mere decoration in ancient societies. They formed a crucial visual language of power that everyone could read at a glance. Long before written laws codified who could wear what, color itself became one of the most effective and immediate symbols of authority throughout human civilization. In the Roman Empire, no color spoke of imperial power more clearly than Tyrian purple. This wasn't just any purple, it was a specific, rich shade that immediately identified its wearer as someone of extraordinary importance. What makes this color particularly fascinating is its bizarre origin. It came from the mucus gland of a specific species of sea snail found in the Mediterranean. Imagine this. It took more than 10,000 snails to produce just 1 gram of this precious dye. The resulting fabric was literally worth its weight in gold, sometimes even more. The process of creating this purple dye was as unpleasant as it was labor-intensive. Workers would collect thousands of these sea creatures, crush them, and then let them ferment in vats for days. The stench was so overwhelming that dye workshops were typically located far outside city limits. The Roman author Pliny the Elder described the smell as offensive and stubborn, yet the final product, that distinctive purple with its slight reddish tinge, was considered worth every effort. During the height of the Roman Empire, laws known as the sumptuary laws strictly controlled who could wear this color. Only the emperor could wear a toga completely dyed in Tyrian purple. The punishment for commoners who dared to wear imperial purple. It could be as severe as death. When you saw someone wearing purple in ancient Rome, you weren't just seeing a fashion choice. You were witnessing a powerful statement about who controlled the empire. This association became so strong that the term "born in the purple" came to describe children born to reigning emperors. In the Byzantine Empire, which continued Roman traditions, there was even a special purple-colored room in the imperial palace where empresses gave birth, ensuring their children were literally born in the purple. Half a world away in ancient China, yellow held a similarly sacred position. Beginning with the first emperor of the Qin dynasty around 220 years before Christ, and formalized during the Tang dynasty some 800 years later, imperial yellow became the exclusive color of the emperor. This wasn't just any yellow, but a specific shade close to what we might call golden yellow or saffron. Why yellow? In Chinese cosmology, yellow represented the element of earth, the center of the universe, and the principle of balance. The emperor was seen as ruling from the center of the world, maintaining harmony between heaven and earth. The Yellow River, cradle of Chinese civilization, further reinforced this color's cultural significance. The restrictions on imperial yellow were enforced with deadly seriousness. During the Qing dynasty, only the emperor could wear robes made entirely of this color. Even princes of royal blood could only use yellow as an accent color in their clothing. Common citizens caught wearing imperial yellow could face execution along with their entire family, a dramatic example of how seriously color symbolism was taken. What's particularly remarkable is how the production methods for these elite colors often match their symbolic significance. Chinese imperial yellow required saffron, one of the world's most expensive spices. Each saffron flower produces only 3 tiny red stigmas that must be harvested by hand at dawn, and it takes more than 70,000 flowers to produce 1 pound of dye. The enormous labor and expense involved in creating such colors reinforced their exclusivity. In Mesoamerica, the Maya and Aztec civilizations prized a brilliant blue pigment called Maya blue. This extraordinary color, resistant to deterioration over time, was reserved for ritual objects and the clothing of priests and rulers. The pigment came from the indigo plant combined with a special clay in a complex process that remained a mystery to modern scientists until recently. When Spanish conquistadors arrived in the 16th century, they were amazed by this vibrant blue that seemed to glow with inner light, a color that immediately signaled divine authority to the indigenous peoples. Even in medieval Europe, the color blue underwent a fascinating transformation from being relatively unimportant to becoming a royal color. In the 12th century, when stained glass artisans at Saint-Denis Cathedral near Paris developed a brilliant blue for depictions of the Virgin Mary's robes, the color became associated with divinity. The French kings, claiming divine right to rule, soon adopted this royal blue as their signature color. What makes these color traditions so powerful is how they operated on multiple levels simultaneously. They weren't just pretty to look at. They combined economic value, technical difficulty, religious symbolism, and legal restriction into a perfect package of visual propaganda. When an emperor appeared wearing his exclusive color, everyone understood the message without a single word being spoken. I alone have the resources, the right, and the divine blessing to rule. But power wasn't just about physical objects and colors. It was equally about performance. Throughout history, rulers understood something that modern politicians still practice today. Authority must be dramatized, enacted, and brought to life through carefully choreographed public spectacles. Rituals and ceremonies transformed abstract power into visceral emotional experiences that connected rulers to their subjects in profound ways. Consider the coronation of a medieval European king, a theatrical masterpiece of power symbolism. When William the Conqueror was crowned King of England on Christmas Day in the year 1066, the ceremony wasn't merely an administrative formality, it was an elaborate divine drama that unfolded in Westminster Abbey, transforming a military conqueror into God's anointed sovereign before the eyes of his new subjects. The ceremony followed a script centuries in the making. First, the king would enter the cathedral dressed not in royal finery, but in simple clothes, symbolizing his humble humanity. Then came the critical moment of transformation, the anointing with holy oil. This wasn't ordinary oil, but chrism, the same sacred substance used in baptism and priestly ordination. As the Archbishop of Canterbury poured this oil on William's head, hands, and chest, the symbolism was unmistakable. This man was being transformed, becoming something more than human, touched by divine grace. Only after this sacred anointing would the actual crown be placed on the king's head, followed by the presentation of other regalia. The orb representing the world, the scepter signifying justice, and the sword of state embodying military authority. What's remarkable about these medieval coronations is how they deliberately blurred the line between political ceremony and religious sacrament. When subjects witnessed their king receiving these symbols amid clouds of incense, Gregorian chants and Latin prayers, his authority became intertwined with their deepest spiritual beliefs. But Europe was far from alone in using ceremony as political theatre. In China, the emperor performed the grand imperial sacrifices at the Temple of Heaven in Beijing, a ritual so complex and precise that it involved thousands of participants and months of preparation. During these ceremonies, the emperor would offer sacrifices to heaven while dressed in robes whose colors and designs corresponded precisely to the season and celestial alignments. The extraordinary detail of these Chinese imperial rituals reveals their true purpose. Everything, from the emperor's exact position to the number of steps he took to the specific musical notes played, was dictated by centuries of tradition and cosmic symbolism. Any mistake in the ritual was considered an ominous sign that the emperor had lost the mandate of heaven. When earthquakes or floods struck shortly after an imperial ceremony, it could spark whispers that the ritual had been improperly performed, potentially undermining the emperor's legitimacy. In ancient Egypt, perhaps no ceremony better captured the theatre of power than the Sed festival, a ritual renewal of the pharaoh's strength and authority. After 30 years of rule, and every few years thereafter, the aging pharaoh would perform a ceremonial run around boundary markers, physically demonstrating his continued vigor and fitness to rule. Historical records show that elderly pharaohs who could barely walk would still insist on performing this ritual, sometimes being carried between the markers when necessary, understanding that the symbolic performance was more important than the reality. What makes these ceremonies particularly fascinating is how they created moments of genuine emotional connection between rulers and subjects. When Richard the Lionheart returned to England after being held captive during the Crusades, his ceremonial procession through London created such emotional outpouring that chroniclers reported grown men weeping in the streets. The elaborate ceremony transformed a flesh and blood monarch into the living embodiment of the nation itself. Even more intriguing are the hidden aspects of royal ceremonies, the parts deliberately kept secret. In many African kingdoms, the most sacred rituals of kingship occurred behind closed doors, with only a select few witnesses. The Ashanti people of what is now Ghana performed the most critical royal rituals in the dead of night, believing that the mysterious nature of these ceremonies enhanced their power. The very fact that common people couldn't see these rituals made them seem more magical and significant. Here's a remarkable detail most people don't know. In many societies, royal ceremonies included deliberate moments of humiliation for the ruler. During coronations in medieval France, the king would be publicly reminded of his mortality and duty to his people. In Japan, each new emperor still performs the Daijosei ritual, spending a night alone in a purpose-built wooden hall, symbolically communing with the goddess Amaterasu, a night described as filled with trials and spiritual tests before divine approval is granted. These elements of hardship and testing served a crucial psychological purpose. They demonstrated that the ruler had earned their authority through ordeal and divine selection, not merely inherited it through birth. When subjects witnessed their king enduring these ceremonial trials, it reinforced the message that power came with responsibility and divine scrutiny. The true genius of these political performances was how they transformed the abstract concept of authority into a sensory, emotional experience. Through music that stirred the soul, incense that filled the nose, visual splendor that dazzled the eyes, and solemn words that touched the heart, these ceremonies engaged every sense. They didn't just tell people who held power, they made them feel it in their bones. Though thousands of years separate the first human societies from our modern world, the visual language of power continues to thrive all around us, often in ways we barely notice. The symbols that once adorned pharaohs and emperors have evolved but never disappeared. They've simply adapted to our contemporary understanding of authority and leadership. Take a moment to consider the next time you find yourself in a courtroom. The judge enters and everyone rises. A ritual acknowledgement of authority that would be instantly recognizable to an ancient Egyptian or Roman. The judge wears a distinctive black robe, a direct descendant of the special garments that separated authority figures from common people for millennia. In the United Kingdom and many Commonwealth nations, judges still wear white wigs, a fashion that originated in the 17th century but serves exactly the same purpose as the elaborate headdresses of ancient priests, to transform an ordinary person into the embodiment of an institution. The raised platform where the judge sits, literally elevating them above everyone else in the room, employs the same architectural psychology used in ancient throne rooms. Even the ceremonial hammer, the gavel that commands silence with a single strike, echoes the scepters and staffs that once symbolized a ruler's right to command and punish. When the bailiff announces, "All rise," we're participating in a ritual of power that has roots stretching back to the dawn of civilization. Military uniforms offer another striking example of power symbolism's enduring legacy. The elaborate medals and ribbons that adorn a general's chest serve exactly the same purpose as the necklaces of lion teeth worn by tribal chiefs thousands of years ago. They visually narrate stories of bravery, achievement, and status. The distinctive headgear of elite military units, from berets to ceremonial helmets, continues the ancient tradition of marking leadership through special headdresses. What's particularly fascinating is how military insignia deliberately creates visual hierarchies. From a distance, you can immediately tell a private from a colonel from a general. The symbols on their shoulders and chest instantly communicate their place in the chain of command. This visual shorthand for hierarchy would be immediately understood by ancient Egyptians, who used similar systems to distinguish priests of different ranks. Even the colors of military dress uniforms, the red of the British redcoats or the blue of American formal attire, carry forward the tradition of using specific colors to identify authority. Though we no longer restrict colors like imperial purple or yellow to rulers alone, the psychological impact of distinctive colors remains potent in establishing group identity and authority. In our supposedly democratic and egalitarian age, national symbols serve many of the same functions as ancient royal emblems. The American eagle, the British lion, the Russian bear. These animal symbols directly continue the ancient practice of associating leadership with powerful creatures. The eagle that appears on the Great Seal of the United States clutching arrows and an olive branch would be instantly recognizable to a Roman legionnaire as a symbol of imperial authority. National flags, with their carefully chosen colors and emblems, function remarkably like the standards carried into battle by ancient armies. They transform abstract concepts like nation and state into visual symbols that can command emotional loyalty. When flags are raised during Olympic ceremonies or displayed behind political leaders during speeches, they're serving exactly the same psychological purpose as the god symbols carried before Egyptian pharaohs, associating human authority with something higher, something worthy of devotion. Even our corporate world hasn't escaped the ancient grammar of power symbolism. The imposing headquarters of major banks and corporations, with their soaring atriums and impressive facades, are the modern equivalent of ancient temples and palaces. When you walk into the headquarters of a global financial institution, the architectural message is clear. This is a place of power, stability, and permanence, the very same message conveyed by the Temple of Karnak or the Forbidden City. Corporate logos themselves function as modern power symbols. The simplicity and recognizability of the Apple logo or the McDonald's golden arches serve the same purpose as royal seals and coats of arms. They're instantly identifiable marks of authority and identity that require no words to communicate their meaning. Here's a fascinating detail that connects ancient and modern power symbols. When the United States was founded, there was serious debate about what symbols should represent the new nation. Benjamin Franklin initially proposed the turkey rather than the eagle as America's national bird. His reasoning was practical. Turkeys were native to America, while eagles had been symbols of European royalty for centuries. The choice of the eagle represents a conscious decision to continue ancient traditions of power symbolism rather than create something entirely new. Perhaps most remarkable is how power symbols have adapted to modern democratic values while retaining their psychological impact. The mace carried before the Speaker of the House of Representatives is a direct descendant of the battle maces that symbolized royal authority in medieval Europe. Yet today, it represents not the power of a single person, but the collective authority of an elected body. The symbol remains, but its meaning has evolved. What does this persistence of power symbols tell us about human society? It suggests something fundamental about how we understand and relate to authority. From the earliest tribal gatherings to today's presidential inaugurations, we've never outgrown our need to see power embodied in visual form. The symbols have evolved, from divine crowns to democratic flags, from royal scepters to judicial gavels, but their essential function remains unchanged: to make the abstract concept of authority tangible, visible, and meaningful. This visual language of power remains one of humanity's oldest and most persistent cultural creations, a testament to our need to not just know who leads us, but to see that leadership manifested in symbols we can recognize and respect. The symbolism of power stands as one of humanity's oldest and most fascinating creations, a visual language that has shaped civilization since our earliest gatherings. From the mammoth tusk scepters of prehistoric chieftains to the presidential seals and judicial robes of today, we've witnessed how authority has always needed to be visibly represented and legitimized in the eyes of the people. What's truly remarkable is how consistent these symbols have remained across vastly different cultures and time periods. Whether through the golden crowns of pharaohs, the jade ceremonial blades of Mayan kings, or the ornate thrones of European monarchs, rulers throughout history understood that power must be seen to be believed. The psychology behind these symbols taps into something fundamental in human nature: our need to visualize abstract concepts like authority, leadership, and legitimacy. These symbols didn't just reflect power, they actively created it. When a tribal chief donned a headdress of eagle feathers or a judge puts on a black robe, they are transformed in the eyes of their community. the person becomes the embodiment of something greater than themselves. An office, an institution, a tradition that extends beyond any individual life. As we've explored in this journey through time, the language of power symbols continues to evolve while maintaining its essential grammar. The divine right of kings may have faded, but we still surround our leaders with carefully crafted visual symbolism. Presidential inaugurations, Supreme Court ceremonies, military parades, all continue traditions that would be recognizable to an ancient Sumerian or Roman citizen. Perhaps most importantly, understanding these symbols gives us a deeper appreciation of how authority operates in our own lives. The next time you stand when a judge enters a courtroom, feel a surge of emotion when your national flag is raised, or recognize a corporate logo from a fleeting glimpse. You're experiencing the continued power of these ancient symbolic traditions. So I'll leave you with this question. What symbols of power do you respond to in your daily life? Which ones command your respect, stir your emotions, or influence your behavior without you even realizing it? The awareness of how these symbols affect us is the first step toward understanding our own relationship with authority, a relationship that has been carefully cultivated through visual language since the dawn of human civilization. If you enjoyed this exploration of power symbolism throughout history, please like this video, share it with friends who appreciate the hidden meanings behind our cultural traditions, and subscribe to the Dawn of Humankind channel for more fascinating content about ancient civilizations and their enduring legacy in our modern world. Until our next journey through time, thank you for watching.